Hello and welcome to another Analyst Bar podcast with me, Colin Sisson, and my co-host Richard at Not Stats. How you doing, Rich? You all right?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Colin.
Good stuff. Now, one of the things that we always wanted to do when we joined forces and we started this was to make sure that we demonstrate how wide and how open football and football writing can be, and the kind of the football community. So we're delighted to introduce our first ever guest, which is Ryan Baldi. Ryan, how you doing? You all right?
Good, thanks. Thanks for being on. I didn't realise I was number one. First guest you've ever had, so that's quite an honour. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, the honour's all ours.
Absolutely. No, well, absolutely. We're delighted to have you. We're sort of branching out far and wide as well. I think now's a great opportunity to introduce the first ever merchandise that we've developed as well, which is my Analyst Bar mug here, and the slogan that I find more funnier than anybody else, I think, the home of XT rather than XG there as well. Like I say, they're a unique brand of only two at the moment. I've actually got Rich's mug as well, still in my kitchen. I've not been able to give it him at the moment yet, so they're unique, but hopefully we'll start branching out and start distributing those far and wide. But no, thank you ever so much for joining us, and I thought a great place to start really with this conversation, although not necessarily great in terms of the emotion and the outcome, really is the Euros. How have you both kind of felt with it, and how have you dealt with it after the dramatic conclusion to it all?
Yeah,
from my
sorry,
Brian,
you go ahead, Rich. No, this is your
I mean, for me it's quite easy because I've got a Spanish father and an English mother, and the Italians did a double job over me. So I'm just keeping my head down at the moment. So
I enjoyed it greatly. This month of football really felt like I kind of reconnected with an international football after kind of being disinterested in it for a good few years, especially with the England team. Of course, all these young players that we're seeing coming through, but not just how skilled they are on the pitch, but how they're conducting themselves off, and it's really made me want to root for them. So it was a great journey while it lasted, and it was kind of heartbreaking at the end.
Yeah, it was.
I agree. I agree completely with you. And like I say, I think particularly. Sorry, go on, Rich. No, I was just going to say that the potential that's in this England side, I think, is quite exciting, isn't it? Really, in terms of the kind of the go again factor. I think that's probably been the one thing that's kind of kept me going as a result of the outcome, is really knowing that these players have probably got, at least one tournament, maybe two, maybe even three, in order to develop and kind of build that experience. And let's face it, build on the frustration of what happened there and the way in which we exited the tournament, but also exited it with a sense of pride, which I think you're absolutely right with, Ryan, in terms of, I don't think I've always felt that sense of connection with the England team that I certainly do now. Rich, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to again endorse what Ryan had said about being able to see the younger players actually come through and play on such a large stage at such a young age as well. And I think that's testament to some of the youth development that we've seen, at certain clubs over recent years, which is obviously something that we'll be talking about anyway in greater depth throughout the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that, as a Notts fan, you have to take an awful lot of pride in, I think, is the role that Howard Wilkinson, someone who started his coaching journey at Notts County, played in, that going back to England when things weren't so great, and being able to really start to revolutionise the way youth coaching and youth academies were developed, which obviously is a lovely segue into your book, Ryan, as well, and about how you're looking at academies and how academies have developed and progressed over time. Am I right that you've had some contact with Howard Wilkinson for your book? Is that right?
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of interviewing Howard a couple of times, one of which for a book, The Dream Factory, which is coming out in August, on August 5th. Just get that plug in there at the beginning. So yeah, I interviewed Howard. There's a kind of a historical element to my book. It's a deep dive into the academy system, looking at how this new generation of England players has been created, but also looking at what cost. But in doing that, I kind of reverse engineered the system and took it back to its roots. So going from touching on the very early days in the 1930s and the first affiliated youth teams and the junior athletic clubs that cropped up in that era, and taking it forward to the slightly more modern era of the late 90s, when, as you said, Howard Wilkinson was a really revolutionary figure in it. He was FA technical director in the late 90s, and he was tasked with kind of overhauling the youth football system in his country. And what he did, he went away and looked at what people were doing overseas. He studied Ajax, he studied Barcelona. I think he looked at a couple of clubs in Italy, looked at Sao Paulo, looking at all the different practices they were using, looking at what ages they were bringing players into their academies, and how they were developing their young footballers, and how much contact time they were having and things like that. And he went away and pretty much devised the blueprint for the modern academy system as we know it. It was a document called the Charter for Quality, which was the set of rules that governed academy football from there on, from the late 90s onwards. Before that, it was a much less kind of rigid and strategic approach to youth development. The English schools FA was kind of the predominant force in youth football for so many years. And then clubs would be able to pick up players and sign them exclusively from the under-14s level, and they could sign schoolboy contracts. But up until that point, they weren't able to sign exclusively with the club. They could train informally, but most of these boys' football was being played with their school or with their Sunday club. Howard Wilkinson kind of tore up that model. He looked at what was being done elsewhere and decided that we need to have these young boys in professional clubs getting access to high-level coaching from the under-9s level. He didn't really recommend that. He stipulated it if you wanted to have an academy license, you had to run teams from the under-9s age groups and up. I think at the time he said he expected all the Premier League clubs to want to run an academy, and he thought maybe the clubs below the Premier League might want to stick with a more basic school of excellence system, which was more like the old model. But he found that once a few joined up, that it was kind of in vogue, and they all wanted to get in on the action. And here we are, 24 years later, and this academy machine that we see now. That's how it came to be. That was the moment of origin for what we know as a modern academy system. And Howard, like you said, the former Notts County coach and luminary is responsible for that, for better or worse, as I'm sure we'll get into.
Absolutely, and I think that was the interesting thing, wasn't it? At the end of the journey of the England team, is you found an awful lot of clubs at Notts' level and at League Two and League One sort of celebrating the role that they played as well in that team as well, and the connection either through youth loans or through players who perhaps started their journey at, let's say, under-9s, under-10s before being picked up by bigger clubs higher up the food chain as well. And I have to say, another element of pride that's probably been shared by a lot of Notts fans really, and was picked up actually by the national media, is Jack Grealish, which weirdly is how we first came to get into contact, because you wrote an article for the BBC, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I did a deep dive into Grealish and his background, and tried to get to the heart of who he is as a person, because at the time he was quite a controversial figure still. He's kind of the nation's sweetheart at the moment, but that's the real sort of 180 flip from where he was maybe even just a year or so ago, when, of course, he got into a lot of hot water for crashing his car when he encountered broken coronavirus restrictions and things. So at the time I was really interested in him as a player, and I was certain there was more to him than was being portrayed in the mainstream media as this kind of a bit of a lad, a bit of a silly lad. And when you look into his background, his formative time at Notts, as you mentioned, but also his family life and what he's been through, some really difficult times. I'm sure you've heard the first goal he scored for Notts County was his first professional goal. He ran over to his dad, who was in the stand, and they had an embrace inside the pitch. The reason it has such emotional significance is because the first person he thought of when he scored that goal was his little brother, who died when he was about 4 years old, I think. And he kind of dedicated that goal to him, and it's a real journey that they've been on as a family. There was just a real depth to him, and I think his time at Notts, having spoken with some of the players he played with there as well, was like I said, it was formative. He kind of arrived a boy and went back to Aston Villa a man, and they're ready to step up and make an impact in the first team of Villa.
Yeah, I
must admit,
back, sorry, Colin, go on. I think we've got bits of internet lag, but carry on, mate.
No, I was just going to say it was almost like a bit of an out of body experience when England played Scotland, particularly because we had McGregor on one side as well. It was also part of that same fantastic kind of loan decision to bring in both Grealish and McGregor, and seeing them on opposite sides of the pitch on there was fantastic, but also mind-boggling as well. Certainly when you consider where, unfortunately, where Notts are now. What were you going to say, Rich?
No, I was just going to say, thinking back to that time with both of those players and being a fan, and I think of other players, even like Tom Ince as well. You could see that they were a different level, for young kids when they were playing at Notts. And that goal that you spoke about, I remember I was behind the goal in the Cup that day, and when he went past the first player, I was one of those terrible fans that was going, hit it, shoot. And every time he went past another player, I was going, no, hit it, shoot. And then, of course, after he beat about 4 of them, he decided to put it in the top corner. So, phenomenal, really. And it was quite an emotional thing to see as well. And like you say, running up to his dad and the whole backstory to that as well. So, and of course, again, even with Conor McGregor, having the pair of them at the same time, playing for Notts, and the spirit that we saw on the pitch, not just from those guys, but the whole squad in that season, was for us was fantastic, really.
And I think also, it proves the importance of perhaps youth loans as well. I mean, it was a brave decision from Aston Villa to send such a kind of precarious but also very precious kind of academy product of theirs to what was essentially a relegation battle. And I wanted to kind of open the conversation up probably beyond Notts, really, particularly for those people who don't necessarily sort of follow Notts. Ryan, how important do you think it is for clubs, particularly those at the top end of the food chain, to find suitable loans for their players? Yeah,
it's something that has had increased focus within academies over the last 5-10 years. Now almost every club, as far as I'm aware, employs a loan manager, somebody who oversees these loans and kind of takes care of them and makes sure the players are getting what they need from these loans and being looked after and developing the right way, and that these loans are suitable for these players. It's a really big thing, because I think you see it a lot. We saw it, especially when you think back to Phil Foden just before he'd broken through at City, when there was a big call for him to get more opportunities. And a lot of people were suggesting, if he's not playing, then just send him out on loan somewhere, send him to, I don't know, just off the top of my head, send him to Doncaster or anywhere just to get game time. They'll take him, they'll have him. But you've got to look at whether that would be an enriching experience for him and the type of player he is and the type of football he's going to be playing in his career. There's no use a guy like Phil Foden going down to play midfield for example, in a League Two relegation scrap where the ball's going to be getting kicked over his head for 90 minutes and he's just trudging up and down a pitch. Even if he wasn't playing at City, he'd benefit more from regular contact time and training sessions with Guardiola and all those players there. That'd be of more use to him than a loan quite for his development. So it's really key to find the right places and time it right for the players' developments too. It's something that, as I say, that more focus has been put into, and a realization, that not all loans are equal, and that some players aren't. A loan isn't necessarily the best thing for them at all, and that keeping them in house would be the better thing. I know that Jurgen Klopp is quite big on the idea of. I think it's something, I might be butchering this, but it's something like he doesn't like his central midfielders to be loaned out. He likes to keep them in-house because it's so key to what they do. Learning his system for that position is something that only he can really teach them, I guess, and the experience of working with him day to day on the training pitch is going to be more benefit the loan, whereas other positions he's happy to send them out and get experience. So yeah, it's definitely something that is being looked at more and more attention is being paid to.
Yeah, we started to see, I think, this going back to Notts, really, when Notts started to have, shall we say, closer relationships with Nottingham Forest. We had Ryan Yates and George Grant on loan, which I think played. I mean, it was fantastic for Notts as well to have those kind of caliber of players playing. But I think, and you've touched upon this as well, that it's got to be mutually beneficial, the understanding between both clubs and about the role that loan is going to play. And I think we saw quite a high-profile breakdown of relationships between the two clubs because there was a little bit of a disconnect between, what was expected during this loan and how long it was going to be. So Ryan Yates being a great example of someone who came to us in League Two and performed fantastically well. And Forest, looking at a very much a developmental aspect, and obviously looking very selfishly for their own player, as you would expect, wanted to move him on. You know, he'd done very well at League Two, and therefore they wanted to try and test him higher up into League One. And obviously that caused a little bit of animosity with Mots and stuff. And so I think you're absolutely right that I think loans, the right type of loans, can play a fundamental role in a player's development. And we saw that with Grealish. And like I say, you know, even though Notts fans probably feel a little bit bitter about the Ryan Yates and the George Grant deals, I think the players that they are now have benefited from the time that they spent at Meadow Lane, really. Rich, have you got any thoughts about that?
No, I mean, just when you were talking about Ryan Yates, I think his choice, or the club's choice, Forest's choice, whoever it was, for him to move up a level to Scunthorpe for the rest of that season was the best thing that they could have done. Obviously, it wasn't great for us because he was, you know, crucial to our good form at the time. But I think for him personally, as a player, it was great for his development, and you can see that that worked for him because he's become, you know, a regular starter in the Championship for Forest. So it obviously benefited him to make that move, and again emphasises why it's important that these guys, you know, if they're going to be developed the way that their clubs want them to develop, then if they're going out on loan, as you've both said, it's got to be to the right club with the right infrastructure that plays the right type of football. I'm kind of hoping, moving forward from the Notts perspective, that, you know, the kind of style of play that Ian Birchnell's wanting to do, you know, is very similar to a lot of Championship, Premiership type Premier League teams play, and you know, it might be helpful and beneficial to us in the future as well for loans moving forward.
Absolutely, and just to widen this debate a bit further, Ryan, but also to bring it back to your book, which I'm really excited for it to be launched, and obviously get my hands on a copy. So you've obviously talked a lot about kind of academies and what makes academies successful, and you've looked at kind of the wide range of academies that are on offer, you know, in England. What are your kind of key takeaways? What would you say is the kind of the DNA of a successful academy, in your opinion?
It's interesting. I don't think there's any one thing that's kind of the issue. That's why it's kind of taken us so long to get to where we are now, where there's a steady stream of English players coming through at a very high level. It's because it's been a constant evolution since that point that we spoke about earlier, and Howard Wilkinson introduced the Charter of Quality. Those set of rules were only really properly overhauled and updated in 2012. There was what was called the Lewis Review, where there was a review done in 2006 to kind of update the Charter of Quality, and I think 63 recommendations were made based off that report. But EPPP, when it came in, the Elite Player Performance Plan in 2012, really kind of reshaped the academy system, and now we're 9 years on from that and starting to see the fruit of it. It's a controversial document as well. There's a lot of downsides to it. There are a lot of issues around. You know, it has improved welfare and it has improved aftercare, but we're still greatly lacking in those aspects in English football. And I know a lot of smaller clubs feel that EPPP is slanted in favour of the bigger size and allows them to stockpile and cherry pick talent. But we've got to look as well at the positives that come out of it and the players that can produce. And I think it is partly as a result of what we've seen through EPPP with the increased standards that's brought in, the coaching levels and the staffing levels that's introduced, and the facilities as well, how all those have been improved in this time, but also what's been done on an individual club basis, what each club is doing, how they're innovating, how they're looking to other clubs, and how they're looking outside of England as well for inspiration, and how the coaches who are doing the day-to-day work, how they've developed and honed their craft. It's all come together to this point where we are now, where we've got a really, I don't think you could ever call it a system that takes in 12,000 boys and 90% of them don't get through and don't have a future in the game. You can never call that efficient, but what the academy system the academy system this country is doing now is producing very, very high quality and high potential young players at a rate I don't think we've really seen before not in terms of the sort of depth of quality and the technical ability across the board. It feels to me quite new anyway. We've always had very good, very talented players come through, but they all seem to be coming from a pretty healthy and steady production line at the moment, which is encouraging.
I think you're right, and I think you could see that again at the Euros. And if you take England as an example of that, you know, it's almost as if there's been a blueprint over recent years that this youth development has worked towards. And because, as you say, I can't remember seeing so many young players so technically gifted as that squad were during that championship, and it's great to see. And it can only, you know, mean great things for the future as well.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to bring you back on something that you mentioned there, but I was wondering if you could just do something for the viewers, really, is to talk a little bit more about EPPP, because one of the things that we're going to get onto is obviously the unfortunate outcome of Notts County's failed promotion bid to get back into the Football League means that we're going to be working outside of EPPP. So would you be all right to just give us a few bullet points just for anybody listening who's not quite sure?
Yeah, absolutely. So EPPP, the Elite Player Performance Plan, as I said, is a set of rules and guidelines that governs elite youth football in this country from the top 4 divisions, overseen by the Premier League and the EFL. It was introduced in 2012, and essentially what it does, it stipulates, as I said, staffing levels, all different types of protocols that have to be in place that are all checked and monitored. So things around aftercare and welfare. It stipulates, for example, that there has to be a head of education at each club. There has to be a full-time person in charge of welfare, for a welfare officer at each club. It also has guidelines and rules around staffing levels, like I said. And what it does, there are regular audits done by the companies who are employed to oversee EPPP, and they go into each academy. They look at what's going on there, how they're operating, what facilities that they have, any improvement have, and they give each academy a grading. So it goes from category 1 to category 4. Category 1 the highest, category 4 being the lowest, and it's the reflection of finances that the club is pumping into their academy, the facilities and the staffing and the quality of the work that's being done. Of course, the category 1 academies are more expensive to run, but by the same token, they have advantages of the prestige of being a category 1 academy and being able to point to that when recruiting players. But there are also little incentives as well. So, for example, clubs below the category 1 level are restricted to a catchment area of a radius of a 90 minutes drive from their academy when they're recruiting players under the age of 16. If you're a category 1 academy, you can recruit nationally from the age of 14. So it's a welfare measure, the catchment area. So it's supposed to mitigate the amount of travelling time that young players are doing, so they're not spending too much time up and down motorways on evenings when they've got training, and it's not impacting their school life and things like that before they get to the age of 16 and then are on scholarships and things with their professional clubs. But what the EPPP rulemakers have decided is that the benefits of a young player from 14 being able to train with a category 1 academy outweigh the potential downsides of a slightly longer travel or of moving away from their family home at a younger age. So that is one incentive for clubs who are at the very kind of highest level and spending the most money. It's most of the clubs you'd expect, all the clubs you hear about who have great academies, but also some slightly lower down a food chain. Like Burnley, for example, one of the academies I visited for the book, have just attained category 1 status. Crystal Palace, another who I visited for the book, have just gone category 1. Leeds have just gone category 1 as well. Clubs like Middlesbrough, another one I went to visit, at category 1. There are lots of clubs. I think Swansea are as well. I think there were around 20. I think there's now close to 30 clubs who are category 1. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but yeah, it's something that a lot of clubs are seeing the benefit of. On the basis of the players they produce through the system, not only for their first team, but in reality, the reality of the system as well is that they produce players for sale to sustain their academy model and as a profit-making venture. But then, as I'm sure we're going to go into soon, some clubs are looking at it and deciding it's not worth the outlay to run an academy, especially if you're not one of the very, very top clubs and you're always liable to be in seeing your best talent plucked away, and they're moving away from EPPP and that system and those guidelines entirely, and doing their own thing. But yeah, EPPP, in the most basic terms, is a set of guidelines that governs youth football in England, and that's what we've had in place now for close to a decade. And yeah, that's still the dominant force, and it's still the set of rules that 80+ academies in this country adhere to.
Well, thanks for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and like I say, I think that's been it's been a bit of a ticking time bomb, I think, for Notts, hasn't it? Really, in terms of kind of the academy, and because obviously it's Notts and their unfortunate relegation a few seasons ago into the National League, we always were aware of this potential impact into our academy. Obviously, you're given a little bit of leeway from the Football League in terms of, you know, your relegation and allowing you to sort things out. But unfortunately, that time has elapsed for Notts. So the owners of Notts had a very difficult decision, and a decision which is very much heart versus head, I think, in terms of where we go with the academy from here. And the decision has been largely celebrated, and I can completely understand why, to try and maintain the academy structure that we had as a Football League club. But obviously the negative outcome of that is that we have to operate outside of EPPP and its regulations, and obviously that leaves Notts incredibly vulnerable toward, you know, to those bigger clubs who could be, you know, taking our potential players. And there was quite a fantastic article, but also quite a chilling one from a Notts perspective from a few years ago, where Tranmere had a very similar thing after their relegation to the National League, and they tried to operate outside of EPPP, and they put the cost at something around £200,000 that it cost them in that one, and then they decided to close their academy and sort of reopen it as a Category 4, which I believe allows them to work anything from sort of 16 years upwards. Which I have to say, you know, and I say this with full in the knowledge that I've got, you know, 2 young boys who, you know, I have carefully crafted into Notts County fans, and would love the idea, as I'm sure everybody would do, you know, if they were, you know, had the talent to represent Notts County. I would want them to have the opportunity to go and represent them at youth level and those sort of things. But the harsh reality, I think, also is that with the surrounding threat that we have particularly got in the Midlands, with the amount of clubs, and you've mentioned quite a few of them there at Category 1, and I believe Forest have just upgraded to Category 1, that, you know, there is the potential for us to lose a lot of these younger players and really struggle to get that up there. But I can completely understand why the owners have wanted to maintain that, because there's nothing better as a fan, I think, than to see a homegrown talent make it. Rich, we were talking about this before we came onto the recording. What's your feelings on the topic? Because I know we differ slightly, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, I fully understand where you're coming from and the Category 4 viewpoint, and it makes perfect sense, of course. But I have a feeling that the new owners, I say new owners, have been with us a couple of years now, but the owners at Notts do seem to be quite progressive in their thinking. You know, they quietly seem to be getting things done. And I think for Notts, one of the big things about a club like Notts County is the community. And I think that's something that they're very aware of. And I'm not sure what Ryan's thoughts might be on this, and I could be way off the mark, I don't know. But for me, for us to be able to maintain an academy of sorts, even under our own steam, if we've got the funds to do that, and it means that we're still out there, we're a part of the community and the slightly wider community as well, and still being looked at as a club that parents would be happy for their kids to be at, you know, for their development and what have you, then I can see there's actually some benefits as well. And I do believe it's all about progression and having that structure in place, and they have no intention of Notts County staying in the National League for any longer than we have to. And, you know, they've probably got aspirations of certainly League One level at least for the club. And it's important that that infrastructure is already in place. And then if there's a transition then back into EPPP for them, it's going to be easier. And they've managed to maintain that community sort of feel around the club, and you know, the profile as well for the club remains higher than the position that they're actually in the leagues.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think with falling away from auspices of EPPP, there's nothing to say that you can't adhere to as much of their guidelines as you wish. Whatever works for you, you can kind of cherry pick them because you're not stipulated to do so. And then, like you say, when you reach that level again, as is the aim, it's not too difficult to realign. It's just then an issue of whether it's cost effective or whether it's a viable sort of expense for the club in that stage, because as far as I'm aware, the funding that you would have received would have been rescinded once you fall out of the league. So the clubs who are within the EPPP guidelines, within the net of EPPP, receive, I think, around a third of the cost of their academy as a grant from the EFL or the Premier League. So there's a guideline sort of estimated running cost for each at each category level under the EPPP guidelines, and I believe around a third of that is given as a grant as a way of encouraging clubs to run these academies and to kind of prop them up a little bit. So it's whether it's still, as I said, financially viable. But yeah, like you said, from a fan's point of view, I think it is something that every fan wants to see the club doing, providing opportunities for young players. And like you said, Colin, there's nothing better than seeing a homegrown prospect coming through. That's the fascination that sparked this book for me. I mean, I've always had a fascination with who's going to be the latest young footballer to break onto the scene, because there's nothing quite like it in football when you see a young teenager sort of taking on all comers and the fearlessness of youth at the highest level. And yeah, my whole fascination with that was when reverse engineering that process and seeing how they come to reach that point. And that's what the academy is, and that's what fans are still think, even those who might not be too aware of the ins and outs of what an academy is and how it operates, but have that youth system in place. And so like yourself, Colin, if they've got young boys or girls of their own, they can aspire to that someday. Or even if it's just seeing local talent, homegrown talent coming through the ranks, that's something that all clubs look to be able to point to. So whether that's something that can power you back up the leagues, then if you are producing players at a strong rate, or whether it's something that then becomes a financial boon with players who go on to other clubs. If it's running well, running efficiently, then an academy can become self-sustaining for a club even outside of the EPPP. So there's definitely lots of incentive to do that if those initial costs aren't going to be crippling to a club who's just fallen out of the league.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, thank you ever so much for that. Yeah, and I think this is a great opportunity really for you to be able to just share with the listeners and the people watching really about your new book when it comes out and its availability and those sort of things. Because like I say, I think academies and like I say, the development of it and like you say, the evolution of it is something that's fascinated me for a very long time. So let us know how we can get our hands on it.
Yeah, so it's available for pre-order now on all the usual places, Amazon and whatnot, Waterstones. It's released on the 5th of August, and it's called The Dream Factory: Inside the Make or Break World of Football's Academies. And as I said, the kind of aim of the book was to look at this new generation of English players, so the Rashfords, the Trent Alexander-Arnolds, those two my cover stars of the book, but also the likes of Mason Mount, Phil Foden, Jadon Sancho. Take a deep sort of look at their developments and their pathways. Try to understand how this new generation has been created, what is the system and what are the methods that have created these players, and also what is the cost of that, both financially and in terms of the human cost, because as we've seen, I'm sure most of your listeners and viewers will know that there is a really high attrition rates within youth football in this country, when there are 12,000 boys just on the boys' side who are assigned to academies at any one time, and only a small percentage get through. Then a lot has to be done around how those people are taken care of. So I've looked at it from that side, and then I've also looked at it from the processes and the people doing the day-to-day work, speaking with coaches. I've spent the last couple of years travelling up and down the country, visiting academies at all different levels. So from the top, the likes of Man City, Man United, Liverpool, then clubs kind of in between, clubs like Fulham and Crystal Palace who have really well-run academies who are looking to move up and produce really good players, and have done so over the last few years. And then also down the league, so I went to places like Shrewsbury Town, Colchester, and Kidderminster Harriers in the National League North. All teams are doing really interesting things away from the kind of the big budget academies, and trying to innovate and hold their own and produce players at a rate that works for them on much smaller budgets. And then also looking at teams who are moving away from the academy system. So I spoke with a former director of football from Huddersfield, who of course have reduced their academy offering, kind of followed Brentford's model. Looked at how and why clubs are deciding to do that, and there's also a deep look at the recruitment aspect as well, and what I've called the arms race for talent within young footballers. Speaking with scouts and parents and players, I spoke with Mason Mount's dad, Rian Brewster's dad, about their journey and how the process of how their boys were scouted, and also the kind of seedier aspects of it, of incentives from clubs and inducements from agents that they received. So yeah, it's a really kind of comprehensive look at this academy system and its current state, looking at where we've come from, like with my discussion with Howard Wilkinson. And I also looked at the national school at Lilleshall, which ran for 15 years and produced a lot of England internationals. I spoke to Jamie Carragher about his time there and a couple of other young players who were there at the time, to cover the historical elements of looking at where we've come from, where we are, and a little look at where we might be going as well. So looking at the kind of blind spots that the system has, where it needs to evolve, and what's the direction of travel at the moment.
That's great.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely fascinating. Certainly something I'm going to be wanting to get my hands on as soon as possible. August the 5th being the key date again. So everybody can just bear that in mind. So I'm not sure if there's any more that you'd want to add there, Colin.
No, just wanted to thank Ryan, really. And like I say, just to bring it back to what I was saying at the start, like I say, myself and Ryan sort of communicated years ago now about the Jack Grealish article. And obviously it's fantastic to be able to get him back on here and be able to kind of present what is going to be a fantastic book to read, but also kind of for anybody listening to this and like I say, the reason why myself and Rich started this was really to kind of demonstrate kind of the availability of the football community. And it sounds like, Ryan, you had a lot of access to a lot of high profile people to research your book as well. So I think that's another great example of how open and how available the football world can be. So if anybody's got an interesting idea or a direction that they want to go in, by all means run with it, because it sounds like we have fantastic outcomes like this. So Ryan, thank you ever so much for joining us on the Analysts podcast.
No, thanks for having me, guys. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
No, it's been a pleasure having you. Cheers.